You ever watch someone act like they own the world? Loud, smug, arrogant. And deep down, you just know karma's watching, quietly taking notes? We've all seen it. The guy cutting the line at the coffee shop like he's royalty, the driver tailgating everyone like the road belongs to him, or that coworker who takes credit for everyone's work. But here's the twist. What if you could actually witness the moment karma strikes back? What if that instant was caught not just in real life, but in a story so wild, so real, that it makes you question if the universe really does balance the scales? If you clicked on this video, chances are you're here for exactly that moment. The one where cockiness collides with reality and everything comes crashing down. And trust me, you're going to get that answer. The moment you've been waiting for? It's coming, but the ride to get there is even better than the destination. So, don't even think about scrolling away. This story? It's made for you. Now listen, this isn't just another instant karma caught on camera moment you'd swipe past on TikTok or skip through on Instagram Reels. This is deeper. This is about why people act the way they do when they think the world owes them something. It's about what happens when that overconfidence turns into downfall, and how life has a funny way of flipping the script. Right now, you're not just watching a video. You're stepping into a story that plays with human nature, ego, choices, and consequences. And if you've ever been wronged, underestimated, or just plain annoyed by someone who thinks they're better than everyone else, then you're going to feel seen today. You're not here by accident. You were meant to see this. But before we dive into the action, let me ask you something personal. Have you ever had a moment where you were doubted, dismissed, or made to feel small? Think back. Maybe it was that boss who never believed in you, or that popular kid back in high school who thought your dreams were a joke. Maybe it was someone close, someone you trusted, who let their ego drive a wedge between you. We all carry those moments, and in this story, you're going to see pieces of yourself. That's what's going to make this hit harder than just another random karma clip. This isn't just about watching someone fall. It's about seeing yourself rise in a way you never expected. So, let's set the stage. The town? Brookridge, Illinois. Small enough that everyone knows each other's business, but big enough that drama travels fast, especially when money and reputation are involved. The kind of place where appearances matter and egos? They run high. Enter our main character, Jason Cole. 34, rich, ruthless, and absolutely sure the world is his playground. Picture the kind of guy who pulls up in a $150,000 sports car just to buy a $3 coffee and makes sure everyone sees it. His Instagram? All filters, flexing, and fake humility. But behind the sunglasses and smug smile is a man who's never been told no until now. See, Jason built his fortune on charm and cunning. Real estate, investments, a few gray area business deals that somehow stayed just barely legal. But here's what makes him dangerous. He doesn't just win. He rubs it in. He thrives on making others feel small. And that's where our story begins. Not with a crime, not with a chase, but with a deal. One that was supposed to be easy. One that he thought he had in the bag. One that would show everyone just how untouchable he really is. Only this time, he picked the wrong person to underestimate. Now, I want you to keep watching because here's where things get good, and you're going to love the twist. Jason wasn't the only one at the negotiation table that day. Across from him sat someone no one in Brookridge had paid attention to in years. A name that had faded from town gossip. A face Jason didn't even bother to remember. Her name? Elena Parks. Quiet, calculated, and carrying a storm beneath her calm smile. She's not flashy, and she doesn't care about Instagram likes. But she remembers everything Jason ever did to her family. And now, she's ready to play the long game. That's right. This isn't just karma showing up. This is strategic karma, with receipts, patience, and perfect timing. But Jason has no idea. And that's what makes it so satisfying. Because over the next few minutes, as we unravel this story piece by piece, you're going to see how arrogance blinds even the smartest people. You'll see how ego turns opportunity into downfall. And most of all, you'll see how someone who everyone underestimated turns into the storm they never saw coming. And if you're still here, you're already hooked. That's good. Because I'm not just here to entertain you. I'm here to pull you into something unforgettable. You clicked on this video for instant karma? I'm giving you something better. A real-life reckoning. And trust me, you'll want to stay to the end. Because the moment karma catches up with Jason, it's not just dramatic. It's public, painful, and poetic. The kind of justice that feels like it was written by the universe itself. But we're not there yet. Not even close. First, you need to understand how Jason climbed so high. And more importantly, how the very people he stepped on along the way, people like Elena, were never really powerless. They were just waiting, planning, watching, until the perfect moment. And that moment? Oh, it's coming. Faster than Jason thinks. And when it hits, it's not just going to humble him. It's going to destroy everything he built. All because he forgot one basic truth that life has a way of reminding us. When you treat people like they don't matter, eventually, you find out just how much they do. So don't go anywhere. What happens next will make your jaw drop, and trust me, you won't believe how it ends. Jason Cole had been at the top of his game for years. The type of guy who made money look easy, as if success was something anyone could grab with the right contacts, the right attitude, and the right luck. But Jason didn't believe in luck. He believed in domination. It wasn't enough to be successful. No, that wasn't his goal. His true ambition? To make everyone else around him feel small, insignificant. People like him, the ones who knew how to turn every conversation into a transaction, every deal into a power play, thrived on the feeling that they were untouchable. And Jason had built his empire not just on wealth, but on fear. Fear that no one else could touch him. Fear that no one else could outsmart him. But what happens when someone does? Elena Parks had returned to Brookridge in the most unassuming way possible. There were no grand announcements, no fanfare, no social media posts about her arrival. In fact, most people didn't even realize she had come back until the deal happened. But for Jason, her reappearance was a reminder of everything he'd tried to bury. It was something that wasn't supposed to resurface, at least not so soon. Elena wasn't just any person from his past. She was the sister of a man who Jason had once destroyed, figuratively and in some ways literally. For years ago, Elena's brother, Ryan, had been Jason's closest business associate, until he wasn't. Until one fateful decision left Ryan out in the cold, with his career in ruins and his life spiraling downward. Jason had made sure of it. Ryan had been a rising star in Brookridge's tight-knit business scene. A young, talented entrepreneur with big ideas, someone Jason could have partnered with to grow his portfolio even bigger. But Ryan was different. He wasn't motivated by status or wealth. He wanted to build something that mattered, something that would last. Jason, on the other hand, couldn't fathom a world where someone would work just for the sake of building something meaningful rather than for the money it could generate. That difference led to a fallout. Ryan had tried to cut ties with Jason when he realized how corrupt his methods were. Jason didn't like being rejected, and he especially didn't like being challenged. So, he used every trick in the book to bury Ryan's reputation, manipulate his business relationships, and ultimately sabotage his financial stability. Ryan disappeared after that, moving away from Brookridge and leaving behind a town that had once admired him. Jason, on the other hand, became the kingpin, reigning over real estate deals, stock portfolios, and partnerships that extended far beyond the small town. But Ryan wasn't the only casualty in Jason's rise. There were others, too, people who had been burned by his ruthless strategies, people who had been left behind in his wake. Jason had always been careful, though. He knew how to play the game without leaving any fingerprints, and any time things started to look suspicious, he made sure to cover his tracks. It was all about reputation and perception. The appearance of success was everything, and if you couldn't see through the facade, then you were part of the illusion. That's how Jason had built his empire. And yet, as confident as Jason was, something about this latest deal felt different. Something felt off. Elena had come out of nowhere, and now she was sitting at the same negotiation table as him, looking calm, collected, and more importantly, unfazed. She didn't even seem nervous to be there, sitting across from someone who had the town's top lawyers and financiers on his payroll. And that unsettled Jason in a way he couldn't fully grasp. He'd expected her to be angry, maybe confrontational, demanding an apology or restitution for the years her brother had lost. But she wasn't. She wasn't angry at all. Instead, she was oddly composed, almost as if she had been planning this for a long time. The more Jason thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. Why was she back now? Was it about revenge? Was it something more personal? Or was it just business? Either way, Elena wasn't acting like a victim. She was acting like a player with a plan. And that was what Jason couldn't understand. He had been watching her carefully during their meeting, trying to decipher any hint of her true intentions. But Elena was a master at hiding her thoughts. She smiled just enough to be polite, but never too much to give anything away. Her eyes, though, they were a different story. They didn't hold the softness he expected from someone who had been wronged. Instead, there was a sharpness in them, like she had been sharpening her tools for this moment for years. She wasn't intimidated. She wasn't desperate. She was waiting. And Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the air. The rules had shifted. He wasn't in control anymore, and that realization stirred something dark inside him. But what could it be? What did she have that could bring him to his knees? He had everything after all. He had money. He had influence. And most importantly, he had the whole town convinced that he was untouchable. So, what was Elena bringing to the table? As the negotiations continued, Jason's mind started to wander. Was she really just here for business? Or was there something more at play? Maybe it wasn't just about money for her. Maybe she had something personal that she was after. Something that went deeper than just a simple business deal. And then, just as Jason was about to voice his concerns, Elena said something that made his blood run cold. "I know exactly what you did to my brother, Jason." It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't even a threat. But it was a statement, and the way she said it made Jason's heart skip a beat. How could she know? He had made sure to bury any trace of his involvement in Ryan's downfall. He had covered his tracks, kept everything quiet, made sure there were no loose ends. But here she was, dropping that line like it was nothing. It was as if she knew everything. Suddenly, the game had changed. Jason was no longer the one pulling the strings. Elena had just thrown the first piece of the puzzle on the table. And it was the one thing he hadn't expected. Control. The feeling of unease crawled up Jason's spine. He glanced around the room, his mind racing to make sense of what was happening. But as he did, he realized something even more disturbing. The other people in the room, his partners, his associates, were watching him. They were waiting for him to respond, waiting for him to make the next move. But how could he make the next move if he didn't even know what the rules were anymore? How could he act when he wasn't sure if the ground beneath him was real? Jason's mind was spinning. He had always been the one who set the rules. But now? He wasn't so sure anymore. Jason's mind was still racing from Elena's words, the echo of her voice ringing in his ears long after the meeting had ended. "I know exactly what you did to my brother, Jason." It wasn't just a threat, it was a challenge. And suddenly, all the power Jason thought he had seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. He had made his way to the top by controlling everything around him, bending people, situations, even facts to his will. But now? Now he was the one who was losing control. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being played, but by who? And how? Elena? Someone else? Or was there a force beyond his comprehension working against him? As soon as the meeting ended, Jason rushed back to his office. He needed to find answers. Answers that would clear his name, answers that would explain how Elena knew about Ryan, answers that would help him reassert his dominance. There had to be a reason she was back in Brookridge, a reason she was targeting him. But what was it? He thought back to their conversation. It wasn't just about business. It was personal. She had known something from a time long ago, and Jason couldn't quite figure out why that knowledge mattered now. He'd buried the past years ago. Or so he thought. Jason immediately instructed his team to start digging into Elena's background. He wanted to know where she had been, who she'd been in contact with, and most importantly, if there was any dirt on her that he could use to turn the tables. The world he lived in was a game of power plays, and the more he knew, the more leverage he had. But as his assistant, Charlie, worked through the night, pulling up old records and emails, something strange began to happen. The files on Elena's past, everything he asked for, started to disappear. First, it was one document, then another. It wasn't anything obvious, but subtle enough that Jason couldn't ignore it. Information that had been readily available just hours ago was now locked behind inaccessible firewalls, with no explanation as to why. And that was just the beginning. A cold sweat broke out on Jason's forehead as he watched Charlie struggle with the system. There was no technical reason why the files should be gone. They weren't corrupted. They weren't deleted. They had just vanished, as if someone had erased them without a trace. Jason's instincts told him that this wasn't a coincidence. Someone, somewhere, was making sure he didn't uncover whatever it was that Elena was hiding. The walls were closing in, and Jason's gut told him this was only the beginning. But who was behind it? Who had the power to erase his search so easily? Jason immediately called his most trusted ally, Victor West, his lawyer. Victor had been with him since the early days of his rise, the one person who Jason knew he could count on. Or so he thought. When Jason explained what had been happening, Victor's voice remained calm, measured as always. Jason, maybe it's best to leave it alone. You've got too much on the line. You've built an empire. It's not worth risking it for whatever this is. Jason's heart raced. There was something about Victor's tone that felt off, like he was trying to talk Jason down, trying to prevent him from digging deeper. For a moment, Jason considered letting it go. Maybe Victor was right. Maybe this was just a blip, a mistake, and there was nothing more to it. But then the memory of Elena's eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, flashed in his mind. She wasn't here to play nice. She wasn't here to forgive. Jason couldn't let it go. He refused to back down. But as Jason decided to press forward, even against Victor's warnings, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. He received an anonymous tip-off, a cryptic text message that appeared on his phone late one night. The message simply read, "You're being watched. Don't dig any deeper." Jason stared at the message, his fingers frozen over the screen. Who was watching him? Who knew what he was planning? His mind immediately went to Elena. After all, she had seemed to know more than she was letting on. But then a new thought struck him. Could it be someone else? Someone closer to him than he realized? Could it be someone inside his own circle? Someone with the access and the motive to interfere? He needed answers, but finding the truth had become far more dangerous than he ever imagined. Jason began to feel like he was surrounded by shadows. Every door he opened seemed to reveal more questions, more things he couldn't explain. The more he uncovered, the more secrets began to surface, some old, some new. In his attempts to find out what Elena knew, he was only pushing further into a web of deceit and betrayal, one that seemed to grow thicker the more he tried to untangle it. The next day, Jason met with his closest confidant, Heather Ross, an old friend and the head of his PR team. Heather had always been the one to keep his image spotless, to make sure the public saw him exactly the way he wanted. But as she walked into his office that afternoon, there was something different about her. Her usual confidence was replaced with unease. She hesitated before speaking, glancing around the room as though looking for someone else. "Jason, I've been hearing things," she began, her voice low. "Things that you might not want to hear. People are talking, and it's not good. They're starting to ask questions about you, about your past. About Ryan." Jason's chest tightened. This wasn't just about Elena anymore. Heather wasn't just speaking of rumors. She was talking about something real. Something that was slipping through the cracks of his perfect image. People were starting to question his empire, his rise to the top. The very foundation of his success was starting to crumble, and Jason wasn't sure if he could hold it together much longer. But there was one detail in Heather's words that stood out. "Who's asking these questions, Heather?" Jason demanded. "Who's stirring up trouble now?" Heather's face went pale. "I don't know, Jason. But I've been hearing that some people, important people, are starting to look into you. They're digging into your business dealings. They want to know if your success has been clean." Jason's heart sank. This wasn't just an isolated attack. There was something larger at play. Someone was orchestrating this campaign against him, and it wasn't just Elena. As Jason left the meeting, a sense of unease settled over him. He was being watched. His empire was being threatened. And the more he dug, the more enemies he seemed to create. But who could he trust? Who could he turn to when even those closest to him seemed to be slipping away? In the back of his mind, a new question arose. What if everything he thought he knew about his success, about Elena, about the people around him, was a lie? What if the truth was something far darker, something that could destroy everything he'd built? And as Jason stood on the edge of this new mystery, with more questions than answers, he couldn't shake the feeling that the one thing he feared the most was already happening. Someone was out to take him down from the inside. But who?
And why?
The answers, it seemed, were just out of reach, slipping away with every move he made. And the clock was ticking. Jason sat alone in his office long after the sun had set, the room dimly lit by the glow of his desk lamp. His mind was reeling, trying to make sense of the barrage of questions, threats, and the vague feeling that something much bigger than he realized was unfolding around him. Every lead seemed to slip through his fingers, and every answer only brought more confusion. He was too deep into the web now, too far down a path he could no longer control. But what disturbed him most wasn't just the disappearance of crucial files, or the unsettling cryptic message he'd received. It was the nagging feeling that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built, and everything that had made him who he was. Jason wasn't just fighting to protect his empire. He was now fighting to protect his own life, his legacy, and the truth he thought he'd carefully crafted over the years. But as each layer peeled back, the deeper the mystery seemed to go. Just as Jason was about to pore over his latest findings, trying to decipher the cryptic text message again, a sudden knock on his office door jolted him out of his thoughts. His assistant, Charlie, stepped inside, looking visibly shaken. In his hand was a letter, its envelope old and worn, as though it had traveled far before reaching Jason. He didn't say a word as he handed it over, but the look on his face was enough to make Jason's heart race. Jason tore open the envelope with shaky hands, the creaking sound of paper echoing in the otherwise silent room. The letter inside was brief, but chilling. The words written in dark ink read, "You think you're the only one in danger? There are others. Watch them closely." No signature, no other identifying marks. Just the haunting message and a feeling that seemed to press down on him from all sides. At first, Jason thought it was just another tactic to rattle him. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He wasn't the only one who had been receiving threats. His mind immediately went to Victor, his trusted lawyer, the one person who had always been by his side. Victor had been warning him to stay quiet, to back off. Had Victor received a similar message? Was this why he'd been so adamant about Jason not digging deeper? Jason's instinct screamed at him to act fast. He couldn't waste another second. But as he picked up his phone to call Victor, another thought stopped him in his tracks. What if Victor was involved in this? What if he, too, was playing a role in the unraveling of Jason's world? He couldn't afford to trust anyone without confirmation. The game had changed, and Jason had to assume that everyone around him was either an enemy or a pawn in someone else's plot. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. But as Jason's hand hovered over the phone, there was another knock on his office door. This time it was Heather, his PR head. She had a worried look on her face as she stepped into the room. Jason noticed immediately that she was clutching something in her hands, something small and wrapped in tissue paper. "Jason," she said, her voice tight with tension. "I don't know what's going on, but I think you need to see this." Jason's stomach dropped. "What is it?" he asked, though he had a sinking feeling he knew exactly what it was. Heather didn't answer immediately. Instead, she set the small object on the desk, unwrapping the tissue paper carefully. Inside, nestled in the soft folds, was a single key, a small, antique-looking brass key. It was old, its edges worn down from years of use. Jason could barely take his eyes off it. There was something about it that felt familiar, but he couldn't place it. His mind raced, trying to make the connection. "I got this today," Heather continued, her voice trembling. "It was left at my doorstep. No note, no explanation. Just this key." Jason leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. Do you recognize it? Have you seen it before? Heather shook her head slowly.
No.
But there's something strange about it, Jason. When I was cleaning up my office last week, I found an old document, a receipt, a small slip of paper. It had the same symbol as this key engraved on it. Jason felt a chill run down his spine. The symbol Heather was referring to, he knew it. It was part of a logo for a private company he'd dealt with years ago, a company that no one seemed to remember anymore. Jason had worked with them during the early days of his rise, securing a number of real estate deals under the radar. It was a discreet operation, one that involved shell companies and off-the-books transactions. It had all been legal, but only just, and for good reason. No one had ever connected Jason to it directly. But now this key, the key that was somehow tied to that very company, was showing up on Heather's doorstep. And it wasn't just a coincidence. Where's the receipt now? Jason asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Heather paused before answering, looking conflicted. I don't know, Jason. I didn't keep it. It was just one of those things I thought wasn't important at the time. But now, she trailed off, her eyes darting nervously. Now I'm starting to wonder if I missed something. Something big. Jason stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This was no longer just about Elena or the threats he was receiving. This was bigger than that. Someone was playing a long game, and Jason was starting to feel like he was a pawn in a much larger conspiracy. But the more he thought about it, the more it became clear that he wasn't the only one being targeted. Heather, Victor, Charlie, everyone close to him seemed to be involved, either directly or indirectly. And the message was clear. They were all in danger. Jason's mind raced as he tried to piece everything together. But the harder he tried, the more he realized how many things didn't add up. Who was behind this? Was it Elena playing some kind of long con? Or was it someone from Jason's past, someone he thought he'd buried along with his old business dealings? And then there was the mysterious key, the one Heather had received. Was it a message? A warning? Or something more? As Jason stood at the precipice of this new, deeper mystery, a terrifying thought gripped him. What if the answers he was searching for were only going to bring him closer to his own downfall? The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, and the more Jason uncovered, the more he began to question everything. Nothing felt right. Everyone was a suspect, and yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was even more dangerous than the lies. And just as Jason prepared to confront the people closest to him, a call came through, Victor's name flashing on the screen. Jason hesitated for only a moment before answering. He could feel the tension building, like the calm before a storm. But when he heard Victor's voice on the other end, it wasn't the reassuring tone Jason had come to expect. It was strained, desperate. Jason, you need to listen to me. Get out of town.
Now.
Trust no one. There's no one you can trust. Jason's heart pounded in his chest. But before he could respond, the line went dead. And that was when Jason realized he wasn't the only one who was running out of time. Everyone was running. But from what? And who was chasing them? The answers were still just out of reach. But Jason knew one thing for certain. The deeper he went, the harder it would be to escape. Jason's hands were trembling as he hung up the phone, the call with Victor still echoing in his mind. The words Victor had said replayed over and over in his head, growing more ominous with each repetition. Trust no one. It was a warning, but it didn't feel like just a piece of advice anymore. It felt like a countdown, a momentary pause before everything in his life exploded into chaos. But just as the weight of Victor's words settled in, a sharp knock on the door ripped him from his thoughts. His breath caught in his throat as he turned to face it. No one was supposed to be here. He wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, he stood up, a cold chill spreading across his skin. He made his way to the door, each step deliberate, as though moving any faster would make the tension unbearable. He peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the empty hallway. No one in sight. But something felt wrong. Something had shifted in the air. Cautiously, Jason opened the door, heart hammering in his chest. At first, he saw nothing out of the ordinary. But then his eyes landed on the floor. There, in front of his door, lay a small envelope, sealed with wax, the kind of wax stamp you'd expect to see on official documents from another era. His pulse quickened as he crouched to pick it up, his fingers brushing against the unfamiliar material. It was cold to the touch, as though it had been sitting out in the dark for hours. He ripped the envelope open with a force that startled him, the anticipation almost too much to bear. Inside, there was a single piece of paper, folded carefully. Jason unfolded it with shaking hands, the note inside just as cryptic as the last one. "You think you're safe, Jason? You're not. People like you never are." The words were written in a sharp, jagged hand, the kind of writing that looked like it had been hurriedly scrawled with anger. Jason's heart skipped a beat as he read and reread the note. It was a threat, but more than that, it was a warning. A personal attack. Someone out there knew his every move, knew exactly what he was feeling, what he was hiding. But who? Who could be so close? Just as he was about to turn back inside, a shadow flickered in the hallway, catching his eye. He looked up instinctively, his gaze scanning the empty corridor, but there was nothing there. No sign of movement. No footsteps. But the hair on the back of his neck stood on end, the sensation of being watched too real to ignore. Jason's breath came in shallow gasps as he backed into his apartment, closing the door slowly behind him. His thoughts raced. This wasn't just some isolated attack anymore. This was someone actively hunting him, playing a game he didn't understand, and every move he made only seemed to push him further into their trap. And with every second that passed, it became clearer to him. The danger wasn't just hypothetical. It wasn't just a matter of business deals or shady threats. Jason's life was on the line, and the world he thought he controlled was unraveling in ways he couldn't predict. The feeling of being followed had become an unshakable part of his reality. Jason started noticing things he hadn't before. The reflection of a car in his rearview mirror that seemed to follow him longer than it should have. The sound of footsteps just behind him when he walked through the hallways of his building. He had become hyper-aware of his surroundings, every movement making his heart race faster. He began to wonder if this was the result of paranoia or if something more sinister was lurking in the shadows. Was he really being followed? Or was he simply losing his grip on what was real? But the more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that someone was out there, someone who wasn't just watching him, they were getting closer. And it wasn't just about the threats anymore. It wasn't even about the strange key Heather had found. It was about the fact that Jason's life had turned into a nightmare, one he couldn't wake up from. Later that night, as Jason sat at his desk, trying to piece together the fragments of the puzzle that was his life, there was a knock on the door again. His heart sank. This time, it was different. There was something urgent about the sound, something that made his instincts scream that he shouldn't open it. He glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight. No one ever came by at this hour. Who would be knocking now? With a sinking feeling in his stomach, he slowly approached the door, his pulse quickening with every step. This time, he didn't hesitate. Jason flung the door open with a force that surprised even him, but there was no one there. Only the same feeling of cold air creeping in from the hallway, the chill of an emptiness that lingered far too long. And then, just as he was about to close the door, he noticed something on the floor again, this time, a small, blood-stained cloth wrapped around a piece of something metallic. Jason's eyes widened as he bent down, his breath catching in his throat. He reached out carefully, almost afraid to touch it, and unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a blood-stained letter opener, its blade gleaming under the dim light of the hallway. It was one he recognized. It had been in his office for years, a gift from a former business associate who had long since disappeared. He could barely believe his eyes. He dropped the cloth immediately, his hands trembling. This was no longer just a warning. It wasn't some vague threat or cryptic message. This was personal. Whoever was doing this had been in his office, had known exactly what they were looking for, and they were getting bolder with each passing day. Jason's mind raced, panic beginning to set in. His breath came faster now, more shallow. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. The walls were closing in on him, and he didn't know who to trust anymore. The paranoia, the fear, it was overwhelming. And then, as his thoughts spun out of control, Another realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't alone. Someone was in the building. Someone had been watching him, had been waiting for this very moment. He turned around in a blind panic, rushing to the window to check for anything, any sign that someone was nearby. But there was nothing. The street outside was eerily quiet, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement. Yet, even in the silence, Jason felt it, a presence. A weight that pressed down on him, reminding him that he wasn't safe. He wanted to scream, wanted to lash out, but his body betrayed him. The fear was suffocating. For the first time in his life, Jason realized just how fragile everything he'd built truly was. He was no longer the man in control. He was the one being hunted. And as the night dragged on, Jason knew that there was no way out. No matter how fast he ran, no matter how many doors he closed, it wouldn't matter. The enemy was already inside. The question now was, who was it? And what were they planning to do next? The terror was real. The stakes had never been higher. And the answers, if they existed, were slipping further and further away. Jason's mind was spinning, each thought colliding with the next, as he desperately tried to make sense of the chaos around him. The threats, the strange messages, the mysterious objects showing up on his doorstep. It all felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Every turn led him to another dead end, another unanswered question, another dead body that just couldn't be explained. As the days passed, the paranoia only deepened. No one was safe, and Jason had no idea who to trust anymore. He had tried to go to the police, but the officers who'd once seemed so eager to help had turned cold and distant. Something wasn't right. His lawyer, Victor, was less helpful than usual. His cryptic warnings had begun to feel more like subtle threats. There was no one left to turn to, no safe place. But it was late one night, as Jason sat alone in his apartment, the weight of the silence pressing on him like a physical force, that everything changed. The knock on the door was familiar, but this time, Jason didn't hesitate. He didn't check through the peephole, didn't even consider the consequences. His hand was already on the door handle before he could think twice. When he swung the door open, it wasn't who he expected. It wasn't some faceless stranger or another mysterious figure in a hoodie. It was someone he knew well, someone he thought he could trust completely. Heather stood there, her eyes wide, face pale, and hands trembling. Jason's heart skipped a beat, the confusion written all over his face. Why was she here? After everything that had happened, after everything that had gone wrong, Heather was the last person he ever expected to show up at his door. "I didn't know where else to go, Jason," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, eyes darting nervously, as if she were being followed. "I couldn't stay at home anymore. They're watching me, Jason. They've been watching both of us." Jason stood frozen, his mind racing. This wasn't the Heather he knew. The calm, collected woman who had always been a steady presence in his life had vanished, replaced by someone desperate, broken. "Who's watching you? What do you mean?" She hesitated, as if weighing whether or not to tell him something. Then, in a voice thick with fear, she continued, "You're not the only one they've been following. It's not just about you anymore. They're targeting both of us. And there's something I haven't told you, something I should have said from the beginning." Jason's pulse quickened. He took a step forward, needing to know what she meant. But before he could say anything, Heather's voice dropped even lower, almost to a whisper. "You weren't supposed to find out. But everything, all of this? It's connected to the deal we made. You're not just involved by accident." His blood ran cold at her words. The deal? What deal was she talking about? Jason hadn't made any deal with anyone that could explain what was happening to him now. But Heather's next words shook him to his core. "I didn't want you to know, Jason. But you deserve to. The truth is, I was the one who set all of this in motion. I was the one who contacted the people who've been threatening us. They're doing this because of me. Because of something I promised them a long time ago." Jason's stomach churned, his mind unable to process what she was saying. Heather, the one person who had always been by his side, the one person he thought he could trust above all others, had been playing him. She had been part of the web of deceit from the very beginning. It was a blow to his chest, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. "You set this up?" Jason whispered, his voice shaking.
Why?
"Why would you do that? After everything?" Heather's eyes filled with regret, but there was also something else in them. Something darker. "I didn't have a choice, Jason. The deal, it was my only way out. I had to do it to protect us both. But now, it's spiraled out of control. And I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." Jason took a step back, his mind reeling. Everything he thought he knew about the situation, the mysterious threats, the danger lurking around every corner, had just been thrown into question. If Heather had orchestrated this, if she had been the one pulling the strings all along, then who else was involved? Was anyone in his life really who they seemed? Or had they all been playing him for a fool? He looked at Heather, his anger bubbling to the surface. "You lied to me. You've been lying to me from the start. Everything you told me was a lie. I trusted you, Heather. You were the one person I thought I could rely on. And now I don't know who you really are." Tears welled in Heather's eyes as she reached out to him, but Jason pulled away. Her touch felt wrong, like it belonged to someone else. Someone he didn't recognize. "Jason, please. You have to understand. I didn't want this to happen. I never thought it would get this far. But now we have to finish it. We have to see it through. If we don't, they'll come for us. And they won't stop until they get what they want." Jason stood there, the weight of her words sinking in, suffocating him. The air around him felt thick, like a fog that clouded everything, making it impossible to see clearly. He could barely process what Heather was saying, but the one thing that echoed louder than anything else was the undeniable truth. Heather was involved in this, and that meant everything he had thought he knew was now in question. Every single person he had trusted, every lead he had followed, was now tainted. And if Heather could lie to him about this, what else was she hiding? What other secrets had she kept from him? The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He was more alone than he had ever been. Everyone he thought was on his side, everyone he thought could be trusted, had their own agendas, hidden motives he had never seen. The people he had believed in had used him as a pawn in their dangerous game. But the question was, what now? Who could he trust, if anyone? And then, in the quiet of that moment, Heather's phone buzzed in her pocket, the sound slicing through the tension like a knife. She pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Her face went pale. "It's them," she whispered, eyes wide with fear. "They know we're here." Jason didn't wait for her to say anything more. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door, his mind racing. There was no time to think. There was no time to process. Whoever was watching them, whoever had been behind all of this, was closing in. The real danger was only just beginning. And as he stepped out into the hallway, Jason knew one thing for sure. The truth was far darker and more twisted than he could have ever imagined. And no matter how hard he tried, he would never escape the consequences of the deal Heather had made. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he pulled Heather through the hallways of his apartment building, his mind racing, his thoughts jumbled. The threat that hung over them now was no longer just a shadow. It was real, palpable, a constant pressure pressing down on him with every breath. He could hear the sharp, uneven breaths of Heather beside him, her face still ashen from the shock of whatever revelation she had just dropped. But despite the urgency, despite the need to move, Jason couldn't help but feel a weight in his chest, a crushing realization that the world he thought he knew was slipping away. Everything had changed, and the deeper he went into this mess, the harder it became to distinguish friend from foe. As they reached the exit, the once familiar world outside now felt foreign, menacing. The darkened streetlights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward them like claws. Jason glanced around, his instincts on high alert. Whoever was behind this wasn't just playing games, they were sending a message, and that message was clear. They were watching. They always had been. He turned to Heather, his voice low but urgent. "Who else is involved in this, Heather? Who else is a part of this mess you dragged me into?" Heather flinched at the question, her gaze dropping to the ground as if ashamed. Jason's frustration grew. The silence between them was thick, suffocating, And the longer she stayed quiet, the more he felt the walls closing in. They had to be honest with each other. There was no other way out of this. I need to know. I have to know who else is involved. What did you get me into? She hesitated, her hands wringing together as she looked up at him, her face a mixture of guilt and fear. I didn't want you to know. I never wanted you to be a part of this. But now that you are, I can't hide it anymore. Jason, I didn't just make a deal for myself. I made a deal for us both. Her voice trembled as she spoke, the weight of her confession pressing heavily on her words. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I thought I could control it, that I could keep you safe, but now it's out of control. Jason shook his head, confusion mixing with a deep, rising anger. You thought you could keep me safe? From who, Heather? From the people you made a deal with? The people who've been pulling the strings behind all of this. But before Heather could respond, Jason's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out without thinking, only to see an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. His heart skipped a beat as he stared at it. Without a second thought, he answered it. Who is this? The voice on the other end was low and calm, a chilling contrast to the frantic pace of Jason's heart. You have two choices, Jason, the voice said, each word deliberately drawn out. You can walk away from this, leave it all behind and disappear. Or you can stay, keep digging, and we will make sure you regret it. Not just you, but everyone you care about. Jason's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles white with anger and fear. What do you want from me? He demanded, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to remain calm. The voice chuckled softly, sending a shiver down his spine. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about what we want. It's about what you want, Jason. Do you want the truth? Do you want to uncover the lies, the secrets you've been kept in the dark about? Because if you do, there will be consequences. People will get hurt. And it won't just stop with Heather. Jason's breath caught in his throat. The mention of Heather's name sent a sharp pain through him. What do you mean by that? He whispered, suddenly afraid of what was happening, what he was being forced to confront. The voice on the other end didn't answer directly. Instead, it spoke slowly, deliberately. You're in too deep now, Jason. There's no turning back. The only question is whether you're willing to sacrifice everything for the truth. Because if you do, you might lose more than you're prepared to. The people you trust, the people you care about, they won't be safe. Are you willing to let that happen? Jason felt his blood run cold. This wasn't a game. The voice on the phone was real, and the threat was real. Everything Heather had said, everything they'd been through, it had all been leading to this moment. The moment where Jason had to choose between his own safety, his future, and the truth. He turned to Heather, his eyes narrowing with a mix of fear and disbelief. Is this what you've been hiding from me? Is this the price of your deal? You knew this was coming all along, didn't you? Heather looked away, her lips trembling. She didn't answer immediately, but Jason could see the truth in her eyes. She had known. She had known the entire time that this was the endgame. They were at the mercy of forces far beyond their control, and Jason had no idea how deep it went. The voice on the other end of the phone spoke again, this time with a finality that made Jason's stomach drop. You have 24 hours. Choose wisely. The call ended, leaving Jason standing in the darkness, his mind racing. The weight of the decision pressed on him like a physical force. What was he supposed to do? He couldn't just walk away. He couldn't live with the guilt, the uncertainty. He needed answers. But at what cost? Turning to Heather, Jason could feel the heat of his anger mixing with the rising panic. He could barely even look at her, but he forced himself to speak. Why did you do this? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Heather took a step back, her face crumpling as she tried to hold herself together. I didn't want you involved. I didn't want you to get hurt. But I was running out of options, Jason. This wasn't just about us anymore. It never was. There's too much at stake. There's too much we don't know. Jason's mind was in turmoil. He could feel the weight of his choices pressing on him, each option filled with its own set of consequences. If he chose the truth, he would risk everything, his safety, his relationships, his future. But if he walked away, he would never know what had really happened, never know how deep the lies ran. And if Heather was right, there was no real escape anyway. The danger wasn't just looming on the horizon. It was here, and it was closing in. As he stood there, staring at Heather, the air between them thick with tension, Jason realized something he hadn't fully understood before. No matter what choice he made, the world as he knew it would never be the same. Jason's mind was reeling as he paced back and forth, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The phone call, Heather's confession, the looming threat, it was all too much, too fast. It was impossible to wrap his head around it. The pieces weren't fitting together, and yet there was one chilling certainty. The conspiracy was far bigger than he had imagined. Far bigger than anyone could have imagined. He had thought it was just a few bad actors in the shadows, a couple of people with hidden motives. But now it was clear. There were strings being pulled all over the place, and they weren't just targeting him, they were targeting everyone he knew. Heather's face, pale and drawn, seemed to mirror his own sense of dread. "Jason," she whispered, her voice thick with fear, "there's more. There's more people involved than we thought. It's not just the ones we've seen. It's everywhere." Jason stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding. "What do you mean? Who else? Who else is behind this?" Heather hesitated for a moment, as if weighing whether or not to tell him. The air between them was thick with tension, the silence almost suffocating. "It's not just individuals. It's groups, organizations. Powerful ones. They've been operating in the shadows for years. People we thought were on our side, people you thought you could trust, they've been part of this all along." Jason's stomach twisted with a sickening feeling. Trust had been a luxury he no longer had. And Heather, he couldn't even look at her without feeling betrayed, even though he knew she had been caught up in it too. Who can we trust, Heather? You can't just drop that and leave me hanging. Who's behind this? Before she could answer, there was a loud bang at the door. The sound was so sudden, so jarring, it made both of them jump. Jason's blood ran cold. He wasn't sure if it was the people they had pissed off or if someone else had found them first, but either way, the clock was ticking. There was no time to wait for answers. Heather's voice trembled as she looked at the door, then back to him. "They're here. We have to go. Now." Jason didn't need any more convincing. He grabbed Heather's arm and pulled her toward the back exit, but as they reached the door, someone, stepped in their way. His heart sank as he recognized the figure standing before them. It was Mark, one of their closest friends, someone Jason had trusted completely. But now, seeing him standing there, blocking their only escape route, Jason knew something was terribly wrong. "Mark," Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper, disbelief lacing his words. "What the hell are you doing here?" Mark's face was grim, his eyes hard, colder than Jason had ever seen. "I'm sorry, Jason," he said, his voice low, almost apologetic. "But you're in deeper than you think. I'm here to stop you from making things worse." Jason's blood ran cold. "What do you mean? What the hell is going on, Mark?" Mark stepped forward, his movements deliberate. "You think you've been uncovering the truth, but you've been playing right into their hands the whole time. This isn't just about you or Heather. It's bigger. Much bigger. The people behind this, everything you've been chasing, they've been pulling your strings from the beginning. And now you've become a problem." Jason took a step back, his mind spinning. No, you're lying. You can't be part of this. Mark, you're my friend. You've been with me through all of this. You've helped us." Mark's face twisted, a look of resignation mixed with something darker. "That was the plan all along, Jason. You were always going to be a pawn in this. And now, well, now you've made yourself too dangerous. You and Heather. You both need to be stopped." The betrayal hit Jason like a slap to the face. He stared at Mark, the shock leaving him breathless. This wasn't just a friend turning on him. It was something deeper, something far more calculated. Mark wasn't just working with the people Jason had been chasing. Mark was one of them. Jason's thoughts raced, but his instincts kicked in. "I won't let you do this," he said, his voice shaking but resolute. "I won't let you stop me from finding out the truth." Mark shook his head slowly, almost pityingly. You don't get it, do you? You think you're going to save everyone, that you're going to be the hero of this story. But all you're doing is digging your own grave. The truth? It's already been decided. And now, you're just in the way. Jason felt a surge of rage, but it was tempered by fear. This wasn't a fight he could win. Not here, not like this. Mark was right, they were in too deep. The conspiracy wasn't just about the people Jason had been chasing. It was about something much more dangerous, something with far-reaching power that Jason had underestimated. And now it had turned against him. Before Jason could react, Mark took a step back and reached into his jacket. Jason's body went tense as he prepared for the worst. But instead of a weapon, Mark pulled out a small envelope. He tossed it onto the floor between them, and Jason's gaze immediately shifted to it. "This is your last chance, Jason," Mark said, his voice cold. "You want the truth? Open it. But be prepared for what you find." Jason bent down slowly, his fingers trembling as he picked up the envelope. As he opened it, a cold chill swept over him. Inside was a photograph. A picture of Jason. But it wasn't just him in the photo, it was Jason and Heather. The two of them together, in a place they had never been, a place they hadn't even known existed. The picture was taken at a secret meeting, and they were standing right in the middle of it. Their faces were unmistakable. And in the background, behind them, were figures Jason knew all too well. The truth hit him like a ton of bricks. The people he'd trusted, the ones who had seemed like enemies, had all been in on it from the start. They weren't just connected to the conspiracy. They were its architects. And somehow, they had been manipulating him and Heather all along. He looked up at Mark, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long, Mark? How long have you been working with them?" Mark's face remained impassive. "Long enough to know that the truth is more dangerous than any of us could ever imagine." Jason felt a cold sweat form on his brow as the full weight of their situation came crashing down on him. Everything he had known, every decision he had made, had led him to this moment. And now, with the truth in his hands, the danger had only just begun. Jason's heart was pounding in his chest as he stormed through the dimly lit corridor, the photograph still clutched in his hand. The weight of everything he had uncovered felt like a 1,000-pound anchor dragging him down, but he couldn't stop now. He was so close to the truth, too close to turn back. His mind was spinning with the names, the faces, the pieces of the puzzle that were still scattered, half-formed, and fragmented. But one thing was clear: Mark had betrayed him, and now the full scale of the conspiracy was about to be revealed. As Jason approached the door to the warehouse, he could feel the air shift, thick with tension, heavy with the sense that everything was about to change. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he knew he couldn't back out now. Not when he had come this far. His entire life had been manipulated, twisted, and turned upside down by the people he trusted, the people he thought he knew. But as the door creaked open, Jason's breath caught in his throat. There, standing in the center of the room, was a figure Jason had never expected. The one person he thought he could rely on, the one who had been guiding him all along, the one person who had seemed so innocent, so full of hope. It was Heather. But now, standing there with her back straight, her eyes hard and unflinching, Jason saw something entirely different in her. The woman who had seemed so vulnerable, so lost, was no longer the person he remembered. She was someone else, someone he didn't recognize. "Jason," Heather said, her voice cold, almost detached. "You should have stayed away. You had no idea what you were getting into." Jason felt a wave of disbelief crash over him. His entire body tensed, his hands trembling as the realization settled in. He took a step forward, but the words caught in his throat. You've been working with them, haven't you?" The question hung in the air like a weight, suffocating, crushing. Heather's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "You're not as smart as you think, Jason. You've been chasing ghosts. You think it was just Mark?
No.
This runs much deeper. You've been playing into their hands all along." Jason's eyes flickered to the edges of the room, where shadows danced on the walls, and the sound of footsteps echoed from the far corner. The figures who had been following him, the ones he had thought were enemies, they were all there, emerging from the dark, moving closer. He felt his pulse quicken, a cold sweat pooling at the base of his neck. This was it, the moment he had feared. "Why, Heather," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "Why betray me like this? After everything we've been through?" Heather took a slow, deliberate step forward, her eyes locking with his. "Because, Jason," she said, her voice sharp and filled with venom, "the truth was never supposed to be uncovered. The plan was always for you to fail, to stumble, to get too close. You were never meant to make it this far." She motioned to the room, the people who had gathered there, the ones who had played him from the start. "They needed you to lead them to this moment, and you did exactly what they wanted." Jason's mind was spinning. He couldn't process it fast enough. There was no way this was happening. Heather, his partner, his ally, was part of it all. It was all a setup. Everything he had fought for, everything he had believed in, had been nothing but a lie. As the realization hit him like a wave crashing on a shore, a new voice broke through the tense silence. It was Mark, emerging from the shadows, his face set in stone. "You never stood a chance, Jason," he said, his tone final, almost remorseful. "But I have to admit, I didn't think you'd get this far. You're persistent, I'll give you that. But now it's over." Jason's heart pounded as the figures in the room took a step closer, tightening the circle around him. He couldn't escape. He couldn't run. His body was frozen in place as the enormity of the situation hit him with full force. He was trapped, surrounded by people he thought were on his side. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. But then something strange happened. Something shifted. As the figures closed in, Jason's gaze drifted to a table nearby. There, in plain sight, was something he hadn't noticed before, a small, innocuous device, blinking steadily. His breath caught in his throat as a sick realization washed over him. That device, it wasn't just some random piece of equipment. It was the key. The final piece of the puzzle that had been eluding him. It was what they had been hiding, what they had been protecting from him all along. Jason's eyes flickered back to Heather, then to Mark, the anger building inside him. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice thick with fury. "What does this do?" Heather didn't flinch, her expression unreadable. "It's the endgame, Jason. You've uncovered more than you should have, and now you'll be the one to clean it all up." But just as Jason opened his mouth to respond, the device on the table began to beep louder, more urgently. Something was wrong. The intensity in the room shifted. The figures surrounding him, the ones who had been so confident, suddenly looked uneasy. Before anyone could react, the lights flickered, and a loud explosion ripped through the air. It wasn't a physical explosion, but a surge of energy, something that made the entire room shake with an overwhelming power. Everything went black. Jason's world spun as he fell to the ground, the noise deafening in his ears. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't see. The room was filled with chaos. Then, just as quickly as it started, everything went silent. When his vision cleared, Jason found himself lying on the cold floor, gasping for air, his hands shaking. The people who had surrounded him were gone. Heather was gone. Mark was gone. The device was gone. In their place, there was only a single figure standing before him, their face obscured by the shadows. "Welcome to the real game, Jason," the voice said, low and menacing. "You thought you were uncovering the truth. But what if I told you everything you thought you knew was a lie? You've been chasing the wrong enemy all along." Jason's body tensed. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The real enemy had just revealed itself. And Jason was more alone than he had ever been in his life. Jason sat alone in the dimly lit room, the weight of everything he had uncovered pressing down on him like a 1,000-pound weight. His mind was still reeling from the chaos that had unfolded, the betrayal, the lies, and the constant shifting of the world around him. The faces of those he had trusted, those he had thought he knew, still haunted him, but he was no longer sure of anything. What had been the truth? Was there ever a clear answer? He could still hear the echoes of that final voice, the cryptic words that hung in the air, telling him that everything he thought he knew was a lie. His hands trembled as he wiped away the sweat from his brow, his body aching from the intensity of it all. But as Jason sat there, slowly piecing the fragments of his broken reality together, something strange started to happen. The adrenaline that had coursed through his veins for so long began to ebb away, replaced by an unsettling sense of calm. He wasn't sure how or why, but he realized in that moment that he had finally reached the end. The investigation had taken him to places he never could have imagined, into the darkest corners of his own mind, forcing him to confront not just the secrets of others, but the ones he had buried deep within himself. It had been a journey of self-discovery just as much as it had been a search for the truth, and while he had uncovered things he would never be able to forget, there was a strange sense of closure that now washed over him. As he sat in the silence, he thought back to the final twist, the figure who had revealed themselves as the true puppet master behind the scenes. Their voice, cold and detached, still echoed in his mind. But what did it mean? What had it all been for? The questions that had plagued him for so long now seemed to swirl around him, unanswerable, just out of reach. Maybe he had uncovered more than he ever should have, but maybe that was the price of seeking the truth. The price of knowing too much. It was a cruel lesson, one that left him with more questions than answers, but it was one he would carry with him for the rest of his life. And yet, even in the aftermath of everything, betrayals, dangers, and unthinkable choices, there was a strange sense of peace settling over him. He had survived. Barely. But he had made it through. He had seen the worst of humanity and had come out the other side. The pieces of his life, once scattered and broken, now felt strangely whole, even if they didn't quite fit perfectly together. Jason rose from his seat, his mind now clearer than it had been in months. The room felt empty, almost surreal, as if the events of the past few days had been a dream. Was he the same person he had been when this all started? Or had he become something else entirely? He wasn't sure. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. But one thing was for certain. He had learned the hard way that the truth wasn't always what it seemed. Sometimes, what you thought was a victory turned out to be the beginning of something far darker. And in the end, that truth had changed him, just as it had changed everything. As he walked toward the door, his hand hovering over the doorknob, a faint sound caught his ear. It was the faintest whisper, as if someone was speaking to him from far away. He paused, turning back toward the room, but it was silent again. Jason's heart raced, his instincts telling him that he wasn't truly alone. He knew it in his bones. There were still pieces of the puzzle left to uncover, things he hadn't seen yet, things he hadn't fully understood. The world was still out there, still turning, and whatever secrets lay hidden in the shadows had not yet revealed themselves. Just as he stepped into the hallway, the phone in his pocket buzzed. His heart skipped a beat as he pulled it out, staring at the screen. A message from an unknown number flashed across it, the words sending a chill down his spine. "You're not finished yet." The room around him seemed to blur for a moment, and Jason's mind went blank. Could it be? Was it truly over? Or had this entire journey only been the beginning? He wasn't sure. But one thing he knew for certain. The answers were still out there. And the game was far from over. As Jason's footsteps echoed in the silence of the hall, the screen faded to black, leaving only one lingering question in the air. How deep did the rabbit hole go? The answer, it seemed, was just beyond reach, waiting patiently for the next person brave or foolish enough to uncover it.